Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, everyone. Thank you for joining us this evening for this panel discussion on criminalizing Islam, the Western European panel discussion. So why are MPACUK UK doing this event, Criminalizing Islam? The simplest and bluntest answer to this question is that we see normative Islamic practices being used as markers for extremism. What does that mean in plain English? It means that, for example, if a child expresses an Islamic opinion in school, he may be interviewed by police. It means that so-called counter-violent extremism or preventing violent extremism, CVE or PVE for short, these policies single out Muslims when they are applied on a national level. This event is the Western Europe panel and will be the first of a series, inshallah, as we track the spread of counter-violent extremism legislation and its subsequent impact on Muslims around the world. Case in point would be the UN Security Council Resolution 2178, which bound nations to CVE and PVE policies. As a community, we need to realize that we must be alert to the spread of these policies in other countries because they will end up on our own doorstep too. But we as Muslims should take heart too. If we can defeat such legislation in our own countries, not only have we stopped it here, but we can help and train other Muslims to tackle it elsewhere too. The saga begins in the Netherlands thanks to two key documents: Recruitment for the Jihad in the Netherlands, From Recruitment to Trends, and a memo titled Counter-Terrorism in the Netherlands. So we will start our discussion there. Before we start, we have some simple ground rules. The chat function is for any questions, which will be answered in the Q&A at the end, inshallah. The chat is not for provoking or responding to provocation. Anyone who breaks this simple rule will be removed. Questions from our Zoom audience will be prioritized. And if there's time, we will come to questions from our Facebook audience. To join in on Zoom at our next event, book a ticket on Eventbrite and look out for updates on our social media. That's Brother Paris Popescu. He is also based in the Netherlands. He is of Popescu Advocaten. He has been a lawyer since 2007, specializing in criminal defense law. He is a very private individual, so it gives me great pleasure to host him today in today's public event. Please do go ahead.
Thank you. Assalamu alaikum. Yeah, of course, I am a kind of follow-up to Samira, and I will add in first instance some of the perspectives that she brought forward. The first thing that is very important to add to her story, because it's a story in which she explained very well, in my opinion, the situation that that reached our parliament, what was a kind of inquisition in modern times, to challenge a group if they follow the creed of democratic society, and they make all kinds of definitions if financing from abroad is desirable. And the word desirable, that is of course something else than forbidden. And this is what I think is the most important thing in the whole case, that nobody ever mentioned the judgment of the European Court of Human Rights, because there are a lot of verdicts about this subject, because states, they can refuse financing from abroad if it somehow touches their independence. For example, the Romanian Orthodox Church, they would actually make one big Romania, uniting Romania and Moldova. Then a country can say, look, these are reasons which jeopardize our independence, and those are real reasons, and they don't come forward with this in Holland. And I think that the most important observation is that there is a kind of neo-conservative culture going on, in which they see basic human rights and basic principles like the rule of law as an objection to their perspective of governing. And I will give you the principle of the case that is precautionary thinking. They see after the attacks of 9/11, they're not looking for answers to combat terrorism as a way of repression, making criminal cases, or prevention, stopping crimes, but they do precaution. And let me give you an example that goes first on the introduction. Like you said, if a boy addresses in school, a little boy, an Islamic opinion, then he can be questioned by the police. In Holland, we've seen similar cases. For example, schools learning children Quran. The thought is, if you learn children Quran, some will learn about jihad, some will be explained jihad in a way that is allowed to kill people, some will understand this when they grow up, that they can kill people, and some of that people, when they are grown up, they really will kill people. So that is a very hypothetical question, which is not scientifically researched in any way, but it's a thing where they are staging an event that might occur in the far future. And like this, they are spreading Islamophobia to say that the Muslims will govern Holland, and that the democratic rules will no longer apply. And doing so, the government forgets the democratic rules. And let me give you an example, because as you introduced me, I'm a criminal lawyer, but I cannot give you any cases of criminal cases of normal Muslims being criminalized in a court. Why? Because if it comes to a criminal court case in Holland, you have to have proof, and no proof will stick, of course. So a prosecutor is not going to bring somebody to court and look as a clown afterwards. But the problem is that they do it in advance with these precautionary measurements, which do not apply to the role of law, because there are such a vague definitions. It's the logic of fear. And it shows in that way that a lot of people, mainstream, ordinary Muslims, they are being affected by it. And the best example that I can give you as a case is a case about the Muslim Rights Watch in Holland. This was a foundation that was funded in May 2020, and which has as a scope, like the name already makes you guess, that it's watching out for the rights of Muslims, the defense of Muslims in Holland. So what happened? This foundation was established. Then there was an application to the Dutch taxes. The Dutch taxes said, okay, this foundation is very transparent. This foundation, it has as a goal to combat discrimination, and doing so, any entrepreneur can give a donation and afterwards deduct his taxes from this from his income. So that sounds very positive, but later on the foundation was put on a list, and they said that the foundation invoked anti-democratic sentiments because it was part of a group that invoked hate speech. And they said that the foundation framed the Dutch government by filing complaints about the discrimination of Muslims against the government. So you can imagine this as a example. You are being put on a terrorist list Why? Because you are following the democratic legal framework, filing complaints about discrimination. So that's really strange. If a government says, wow, you say that we discriminate, okay, now you have become a terrorist. And that went on, and then we filed a complaint to the court. Now the question to the judge was, can you please erase this foundation from the list? And then the government, of course, said, we cannot do this because of security. Now, then they ask, what are the reasons for this security? And then they say, we cannot tell you because of security. It must sound very familiar to some people, of course, but this is the way that the government approaches this case. And then afterwards, we went to court, and it turned to be out to be based on news articles. And that means that they just put out some news articles, not about the foundation itself, because the foundation had, in the early months, a very good track record, filing complaints, sending a letter, for example, to the Minister of Education in Holland, asking more attention in schools for the education about the genocide in Srebrenica, for example, because Holland had also a role in that tragedy. A lot of good things they did. And then they came only with guilt by association. For example, let me give you an example. The foundation was registered at the address, and at that address, another foundation used to be registered. That foundation one time organized a seminary, and there was a speaker. And this speaker had a friend, and that friend sent money to one person, and that one person, he was in relation with a group in Syria, and that group was in relation to Al-Qaeda. If you can no longer follow me, it's not a problem, because it's not easy to follow. But this is the government's logic, guilt by association. And yeah, we said in the court, when Nelson Mandela was asked in the interview by a Western journalist why his grandson was named Gaddafi, he said because he used to have good relations with Gaddafi in that time, because he sponsored the NAC in their struggle against racism. And then they start to ask him about Gaddafi, and then Mandela replied to the journalist by saying, the biggest mistake is that people think that their enemies also have to be our enemies. And this is also the thing which happens in Holland, that there are some Muslims targeted, and other Muslims, if they do not publicly denounce them, they are being part of them. And eventually the court case also very typically ended in a judgment about from the court in Holland, saying that the judge was not able to make a decision because he had no jurisdiction over the case. And that was typically that there are legal boundaries, and every time the legal boundaries are being pushed by the Dutch government, because they use very vague definitions which do not even appear in criminal law, and that undesired behavior is being like a format in which they can push any behavior. And now the most important thing that we have seen recently, like Samira said, are the banks. And as you might have heard, there was also hired an organization to do investigations in mosques in Holland and other religious Islamic centers, to check if people were radical, whatever that might be. But the fact is that they are using private parties, the government, to avoid their accountability. Because if the government says, look, we're going to send one guy every day to the same mosque and to let him talk with the imam or with the followers, the believers there, then later on we can have the complaint, look, you are infiltrating the mosque, the government, and in fact, it's an undercover cop going into the mosque without any reasonable suspicion of whatsoever. But if they give this assignment to a private party, then they say, yes, we ask them to do everything in accordance with the law. But if they didn't do that, then that's their problem. And the private party will say, hey, we are no police, we are no government, those rules do not apply to us. And like this is the same with the banks, that the banks have gotten a lot of criminal complaints by the government, so they had to pay very big fines, hundreds of millions of euros, because they were cooperating in arms deals with governments. And now the result is that the people are being profiled by a list saying, yes, if you are coming from Sudan, if you are coming from this country, if you are coming from that country, if you do a transaction, then it's suspicious and you have to have questions. And this is the way, there has been a climate of fear in Holland, and they are using several representatives of the Muslim community to allow those measurements to be put in place. And like I said, it's a completely against the rule of law. And I hope I'm still in the time. So,
Jazakallah khairan, Brother Paris. And shukran for the again another comprehensive answer. And I think like the key point, the key anecdote that you said there for me was how, as a practicing criminal defense lawyer since 2007, you've never had to take up a case of a Muslim facing these accusations in a criminal court, because they know that they would be laughed out of court. So the idea that the Muslims of Netherlands are being used for political purposes, I think that is such an acute anecdote that really carries that point. I thank the every speaker who has stayed on with us. With the most grateful. Jazakumullah khairan. May Allah reward you with better. We will end the live stream there.